Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a journey through some really consequential moments in digital history. Failures, really.
Yeah, failures that stretch from, a single experimental computer worm way back in the 80s,
Yeah,
right up to the kind of massive corporate breaches we see today.
right. And our mission here is to look at these key security incidents, these failures, and figure out not just like what broke technically.
But why the whole system, the people, the processes around the tech failed too. That's the crucial part.
Exactly. We're often told it's about these super complex zero-day exploits, right?
But, the sources we're looking at today, they paint a different picture. It's often about basics.
So we're tracking this evolution from those first technical weaknesses found in the early days, the early internet.
All the way up to these huge operational gaps, these failures in execution that still let attackers exploit similar kinds of weaknesses. Even now, it's quite a threat.
We've got a great set of sources for this deep dive. We'll cover the landmark 1988 Morse worm incident that really changed things.
Oh, absolutely. A wake-up call.
Then we'll shift into let's say, the mechanics. Some detailed technical stuff on modern attacks, remote code execution, man in the middle.
The tools of the trade for attackers today.
And finally, we bring it all together with a case study, the big one, the 2017 Equifax breach, a story of systemic failure.
And, the common threads between 1988 and 2017, they're pretty striking. We're going to try and distill those lessons.
We want to show you exactly where that gap is, the gap between having a security policy, written down somewhere.
And actually doing it, making it work in a messy, complex, real-world IT setup, that execution gap.
Okay, let's dive in. 1988. Can you paint a picture for us? What was the internet actually like back then? It's hard to imagine now.
Yeah, it's totally different. The sources describe it as this almost quaintly friendly, trusting place. Think ARPANET era.
Right. Mostly universities, government labs.
Exactly. Research institutions, military contractors maybe, tiny compared to today. Maybe 60,000 machines, perhaps up to 100,000, all linked up.
Wow, that's it.
That's it. And the key thing, security was based on, well, professional trust, not strong firewalls or complex passwords. People kind of knew each other or knew of each other.
So like a small town where everyone leaves their doors unlocked because, A, it's just neighbors.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
Yeah. And into this unlocked neighborhood comes Robert T. Morris. He's 23, a grad student at Cornell.
And he has this interesting family connection.
Incredibly ironic, right? His father was a chief scientist at the NSA, the National Security Agency.
Wow, okay, so what was Morris trying to do? He wasn't trying to break things initially.
No, not according to the sources. His goal was more academic, almost an intellectual curiosity. He wanted to see how big the network actually was, to count the machines.
So he writes this piece of code, a self-replicating program, what we now call a worm.
Exactly. A worm designed to just, spread gently and report back.
But that intention, just counting nodes, it went spectacularly wrong. What was the mistake? The programming flaw that turned his census tool into, well, a weapon.
It came down to a safeguard, ironically. A safeguard meant to make the worm kind of stealthy.
How so?
Morris knew that if a machine got infected over and over, admins would spot it pretty quickly. So the worm was built to ask a computer, "Are you already running this code?" The answer was yes. It was supposed to just stop, don't copy again.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. But
Morris got a bit paranoid. He worried that admins might try to trick his worm by sending back a fake yes signal to stop it spreading. So he added this little exception. After the worm asked 7 times and got 7 yes answers, on the 8th check, it would just copy itself anyway, regardless of the answer, just to be sure it wasn't being fooled.
And that small tweak, that was the fatal flaw.
That was it. That tiny bit of code, meant to ensure the count wasn't easily stopped, caused this runaway, exponential replication. Machines just kept reinfecting themselves and others over and over.
So they just got overwhelmed.
Completely overwhelmed. They ground to a halt, used up all their processing power, or just crashed. About 6,000 machines went down.
6,000 might not sound like a lot today, but back then.
It was huge. Potentially 10% of the entire connected internet. The core academic and government network.
What was the immediate reaction when systems started failing like that?
Chaos. Panic, really. You had administrators, mostly academic students, scrambling. They'd never seen anything like this before, this widespread, coordinated thing.
Oh, what did they do?
They basically had to pull the plug. disconnect huge parts of the network to stop the spread and try to clean up their individual machines.
Must have cost a fortune, even then.
The sources mentioned significant recovery costs, yeah, and lost time. But the deeper impact was psychological. It burst the bubble of trust.
And it put cybersecurity on the map.
For the first time, really. It was front-page news. Suddenly, everyone was talking about computer security. It wasn't just a niche academic concern anymore.
And the way it spread, the technical method, you said that was kind of a sign of things to come.
Absolutely. It used vulnerabilities that were actually already known, but people hadn't gotten around to patching them. Laziness, maybe. Or just not seeing the risk.
What were the specific vulnerabilities?
Well, one was pretty basic, guessing weak passwords. But the really interesting one, the one that connects directly to our next topic, was exploiting a function called gets.
Gets, where was that used?
It was inside a common network service called fingered. You use fingered to get, status information about a user on another machine across the network.
Okay, so asking for user info, how does that let a worm take control? Walk us through that.
Right, so this is where we see the first big example of a buffer overflow. The fingered program used this gets function, which is part of the C programming language.
And gets is dangerous.
Infamously dangerous.
Oh, sure.
Because it doesn't check the length of the input it receives. It just keeps reading data from the network until it sees a stop signal, like a new line character. Yeah. It doesn't care if the data is way bigger than the space, the buffer, or the program set aside for it.
So the worm sent too much data.
Exactly. Morris crafted a message for fingered that was deliberately too long. This extra data overflowed the buffer.
And spilled into adjacent memory.
Right. And crucially, it overrode something called the return address. That's like a signpost telling the program where to go next after it finishes the gets function.
So the worm rewrote the signpost.
Precisely. Instead of pointing back to the normal, safe operating system code, the overwritten address pointed to the malicious code, the worm's own instructions, which Morris had cleverly included in that oversized data packet.
Wow. So it tricked the computer into running the worm's code instead of its own.
That's remote code execution right there. RCE achieved via a buffer overflow. It was like the original sin of internet security, exploiting a known basic bounds-checking flaw in C code.
And this whole incident didn't just have technical consequences, right? There were legal ones, too.
Huge legal consequences. Robert Morris became the first person ever successfully prosecuted in the U.S. under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which was pretty new back then.
So it set a precedent.
A massive precedent. It established that, yes, messing with the computers like this wasn't just a prank or academic mischief. It was a serious crime. And it forced the entire community to finally start thinking seriously about defenses, firewalls, better password practices, and the absolute necessity of patching known flaws. It was a wake-up call, like you said.
Okay, so the Morris worm gave us that early dramatic example of exploiting memory flaws remotely. Let's formalize that concept now and talk about what's arguably the most critical vulnerability type today. Remote code execution, RCE.
Yeah, RCE is, well, it's the jackpot for attackers.
Yeah.
Basically, it means they can run whatever code they want on your machine remotely over a network.
Without needing to be there physically, without needing an account beforehand.
Exactly. Minimal or zero prior access required. That's why it's considered the most severe type of flaw. You'll often see it rated 10.0, the absolute maximum on the criticality scale.
And when an attacker achieves RCE, what does that actually mean in practice? What can they do? It's not just stealing files, is it?
Oh, it's way beyond that. It means total compromise, full control. Once they have RCE, that's their initial foothold.
The door is open.
Wide open. Then they'll often escalate privileges, try to become the administrator or root user. From there, anything.
Like what?
They can steal massive amounts of data, obviously, install ransomware to encrypt everything and demand payment, deploy hidden crypto mining software that uses your computer's power to make money for them, or use your compromised machine as a launchpad to attack other systems inside your network that's lateral movement.
So it's like they're sitting at the keyboard with full permissions.
Pretty much, yeah. Game over, essentially.
Okay. Now, we talked about buffer overflow. That was the Morris worm's trick. But you mentioned RCE can happen in other ways, too, especially in modern systems. It's not just about C memory bugs anymore.
Right. Buffer overflows, or BO, are still a thing, especially in C and C+ code, which is everywhere. But modern RCE covers a broader range. The main categories our sources point to are things like injection attacks, deserialization vulnerabilities, and out-of-bounds writes.
Okay, let's take injection first. Most people might think of SQL injection.
That's the classic example, yeah. Injection happens when an application takes input from a user, maybe something typed into a web form, and doesn't properly clean it or check it.
Sanitize it.
Exactly, sanitize it. If that unsanitized input gets mixed in with code, like a database query, the application might accidentally execute commands hidden in the input. So SQL injection lets attackers run database commands. Command injection lets them run operating system commands. The core problem is the code mixing data with executable instructions.
Got it. Okay, what about deserialization? That sounds more obscure.
It's a huge risk in modern apps, though, especially complex ones that pass data structures or objects between different services. Think applications built with Java, Python, .NET.
So what is serialization first?
Serialization is basically taking a complex piece of data, an object, and flattening it into a simpler format, like a string of text, maybe JSON or XML, so it can be easily sent over a network or stored.
And deserialization is putting it back together.
Right. Turning that flat string back into the original live object on the receiving end. The vulnerability happens if the code doing the deserializing doesn't strictly check what's inside that incoming data string.
Ah, so an attacker can sneak code into the data.
Precisely. They craft a malicious data string that looks legitimate, but hidden inside are instructions. When the server tries to deserialize it to rebuild the object, boom, it accidentally executes the attacker's hidden code.
Clever. Hiding code inside data. And the last one you mentioned, out of bounds, right? How's that different from a buffer overflow?
It's closely related. A classic buffer overflow often focuses on overriding the return address to hijack control flow directly. An out-of-bounds write, or OOB write, is a bit broader. It means the program writes data outside the memory buffer it was supposed to use.
So maybe not hitting the return address, but corrupting something nearby.
Exactly. It might corrupt other important data structures, memory management information, or function pointers located near the buffer. The attacker then leverages that corruption to eventually gain control, maybe indirectly. It's still about violating memory boundaries, just sometimes with a different target in mind.
So a whole range of ways programmers can make mistakes that lead to RCE.
Yeah, from low-level memory handling in C++ to higher-level logic errors in web applications or data processing. The end result is the same. The attacker gets to run their code.
It seems like after the Moore swarm, operating system developers would have really tried to shut down buffer overflows at least. Have they?
Oh, absolutely. There's been a huge effort since the late 90s, early 2000s. Modern OCs have several layers of defense built in. Two big ones are ASLR and DEP,
ASLR.
Address Space Layout Randomization. The idea is to make memory unpredictable. Every time a program starts, ASLR shuffles the locations of key parts of its memory, like the code itself, the stack, the heap, system libraries.
So the attacker can't guess where their target is, like the return address.
Exactly. If the addresses are randomized, the attacker's exploit, which relies on knowing specific memory locations to overwrite, is much less likely to work reliably. It breaks fixed address exploits.
Okay. And DEP?
Data execution prevention. This marks certain areas of memory, like the stack and the heap, where user data usually lives, as non-executable.
Meaning the CPU just refuses to run code from there.
Right. So even if an attacker successfully overflows a buffer and injects their malicious code, shell code, onto the stack, DEP tells the processor, nope, you're not allowed to execute instructions from this data area.
Okay, so we have ASLR randomizing locations, DEP stopping execution from data areas. Why are buffer overflows in RCE still such a massive problem? Shouldn't these defenses work? Why did something like shell shock happen in 2014?
Because, well, security is always an arms race. These defenses are good, but they're not perfect. Attackers find ways around them. Well, ASLR can sometimes be defeated if there isn't enough randomness, or if attackers find clever ways to leak memory addresses, revealing the layout. DEP can often be bypassed using techniques like return-oriented programming, or ROP.
ROP.
Yeah. Instead of injecting their own code, attackers find small snippets of existing legitimate code already in the program's memory, which are marked executable, and chain them together like puzzle pieces to perform malicious actions. It's complex, but it bypasses DEP.
Wow. Okay, so defenses get built, attackers find ways around them.
It's a constant back and forth.
Which brings us neatly to shell shock in 2014. This wasn't a classic memory corruption bug, right? It was something different, but just as devastating.
Exactly. Shell shock, CVE 2014-6271 was frankly terrifying because it hit the GNU bash.
Which is everywhere.
Pretty much the default command interpreter on almost every Linux and Unix system out there. And Mac OS too, servers, desktops, embedded devices. Bash is ubiquitous.
And the vulnerability allowed RCE. How, if Bash is just a command line, how could it be triggered remotely, say, over the web? That's the scary part.
Yeah, the attack vector was ingenious.
Yeah.
It exploited a really obscure feature in how Bash handled environment variables. Bash lets you define functions and then export them so that child processes can use them.
Okay.
The vulnerability was in how Bash parsed these function definitions when they were stored in environment variables. Attackers figured out they could craft a special string. It looked like a function definition, starting with, but immediately after the closing brace, they could just append arbitrary shell commands.
So hidden commands tacked onto the end of what looked like a function setup.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Now imagine a web server running an old-style CGI script. When a request comes in, the web server, like Apache, often passes information from the HTTP headers like the user agent string or cookies to the CGI script via environment variables.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Right. The attacker sends a malicious HTTP request with one of these specially crafted bash strings hidden in a header. The web server dutifully puts that string into an environment variable for the CGI script. When the CGI script starts up, it often invokes bash. Bash sees that environment variable, tries to parse the function,
And immediately executes the hidden commands before even running the actual script.
bingo. Instant remote code execution, triggered just by sending a carefully crafted web request. No memory corruption needed, just exploiting a logic flaw in Bash's parser.
That's incredibly widespread potential impact. What was the response?
Frantic. The initial patch for the main CVE came out incredibly fast, like within hours of public disclosure, but the flaw was deeper and trickier than first realized.
The first patch didn't fully fix it.
Nope. Researchers almost immediately found ways around the first patch. This led to what got called Aftershock, a second CVE, CDE 2014-7169, and then a whole flurry of related CVEs, I think about 6 in total.
Wow.
Yeah, CVE 2014-6277, 6278. They had to keep refining the patch because the parsing logic was just fundamentally broken in subtle ways. Shellshock was a brutal lesson in how hard it can be to fix core design flaws in really foundational, widely used software. Even when you know about it, getting the fix right and deployed everywhere is a massive challenge.
Okay, so we've talked about breaking into systems using code flaws like RCE and buffer overflows. Now let's shift gears a bit. Part 3 is about interception, the man-in-the-middle attack, or MITM. This feels less about breaking code and more about deception.
That's a good way to put it. MITM is fundamentally an attack on trust, specifically on authentication. The attacker secretly positions themselves between two parties who think they're communicating directly.
Like someone tapping a phone line, but digitally?
Sort of, but often more active. They don't just listen, they relay the communication. And crucially, they can often alter it in transit without either side realizing there's someone in the middle.
So the goal isn't always code execution. It's more about stealing info or messing with the conversation.
Often, yes. Stealing credentials, capturing sensitive data, manipulating transactions. Our sources say this is a huge deal operationally in 2024. Something like 23%, nearly a quarter, of identity-related incidents involved MITM tactics.
There was that anecdote in the source material about wiring money. That really brings home the impact.
Yeah, imagine you're making a large wire transfer. You connect to your bank, seemingly securely. The MITM attackers intercepting that. They let you authenticate, but when you enter the recipient's bank details, the attacker subtly changes just the account number to their own before relaying the rest of the transaction details to the bank.
And the bank processes it, thinking the request is legitimate.
Exactly. The money goes to the attacker. You only find out later when your supplier says they never got paid. It's interception and modification in real time.
Scary. So let's break down the main types of MITM attacks. The sources mention SSL stripping first. What's that?
SSL stripping is a classic web attack. It plays on user complacency. You try to connect to a secure site, like your bank, which uses HTTPS. The attacker intercepts your initial request. The attacker then establishes a secure HTTPS connection to the real bank server.
Right.
But crucially, to you, the user, the attacker only presents a non-secure HTTP version of the site.
So the bank thinks it's talking securely to the attacker, and the user thinks they're talking insecurely to the bank, but really they're talking to the attacker.
Precisely. If the user doesn't notice the missing padlock icon in their browser's address bar, they might proceed as normal, entering their username and password.
Which goes to the attacker in plain text over HTTP.
Yep. The attacker scoops up the credentials, logs into the real bank site using the secure connection they established, and can do whatever they want, all while relaying the normal website content back to the user over HTTP.
Wow. So just checking for that padlock is critical.
Yeah.
What about the risk in public places, like coffee shops or airports?
Yeah. That's usually the evil twin attack. It's a form of Wi-Fi eavesdropping.
How does that work?
The attacker sets up their own Wi-Fi hotspot, maybe using a laptop or a small device, and gives it a believable name, like Cafe Guest Wi-Fi or Airport Internet.
Something people would expect to see.
Exactly. Unsuspecting users see this familiar network name, connect to it, and now all their internet traffic is flowing directly through the attacker's device.
So if they visit non-HTTPS sites, or if apps send data unencrypted.
The attacker can just passively sniff it all up. Usernames, passwords, emails, anything not properly encrypted.
Okay, then there's session hijacking. This sounds like taking over an already logged-in session.
That's exactly what it is. It bypasses the need to steal the password directly.
Okay.
When you log into a website, the server usually gives your browser a temporary key, a session token, or session cookie. This proves you're authenticated for that session.
So you don't have to log in on every single page click.
Right. Session hijacking is about the attacker stealing that active session token, maybe through sniffing on an insecure network, or maybe using other web attacks like cross-site scripting, XSS, to trick your browser into revealing the cookie.
And once they have the token,
They can just present that token to the website, and the website thinks they are you. They can access your account, make changes, perform actions, all without needing your actual password.
man. Okay, one more main type. DNS spoofing or poisoning. This sounds like messing with the internet's address book.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
DNS, the domain name system, is what translates human-readable names like, say, mybank.com into the numerical IP addresses computers use.
Right.
DNS spoofing, or cache poisoning, involves corrupting the records on a DNS server. An attacker might trick a local DNS server, like the one your home router or ISP uses, into storing a wrong IP address for mybank.com.
So when you type mybank.com,
Your computer asks the corrupted DNS server, gets back the attacker's IT address, and your browser connects to the attacker's fake website, which probably looks identical to the real one.
and you enter your login details.
Straight into the attacker's hands. You never even connected to the real bank.
Okay, so those are the goals. How do attackers actually get in the middle? What are the low-level techniques? The sources mention ARP spoofing.
ARP spoofing is a very common technique on local networks, like your home Wi-Fi or an office network. ARP, the Address Resolution Protocol, is how devices on a local network figure out which physical hardware address, MA address, corresponds to a specific IP address.
Like matching a name to a face on the local network.
Kinda, yeah. In ARP spoofing, the attacker sends out fake ARP messages. They might tell your computer, hey, the IP address of the router, that's my MSE address now. And they tell the router, hey, the IP address of that user's computer, that's my MACE address.
So all traffic between the user and the router now goes through the attacker first.
Exactly. They've inserted themselves into the local conversation without anyone noticing, usually.
And once they're in that position,
They fire up tools like Wireshark for packet sniffing. They can just watch all the data flowing back and forth. If it's unencrypted, they can read it directly.
are there bigger scale techniques, not just on local networks?
Well, a much harder but potentially devastating technique involves certificate authority compromise.
Yeah.
CAs are the organizations that issue the SSL/TLS certificates that browsers trust to verify a website's identity, the padlock.
Right.
If an attacker could somehow compromise a trusted CA or trick them, they could get issued fraudulent certificates for major websites they don't actually own.
So they could set up a fake google.com that your browser actually trusts because it has a valid certificate from a compromised CA.
That's the nightmare scenario, yes. It makes spotting the fake almost impossible for a regular user. It has happened, though it's rare compared to things like evil twins.
Given all these ways to get in the middle, what are the best defenses? How do we stop being intercepted?
The absolute bedrock is strong encryption. Everywhere. That means using HTTPS for all web traffic, enforced properly, and using modern, secure versions of the underlying protocol, TLS.
But the sources said a lot of servers are still using old TLS.
Shockingly high numbers, yeah. One source mentioned up to 79% of servers in 2023 might still be using outdated, vulnerable TLS versions like 1.0 or 1.1. Organizations have to get off those and standardize on TLS 1.2 or preferably 1.3.
So encryption first. What else?
Authentication needs to be stronger. We talked about the server proving its identity to you. That's the certificate. But for really sensitive things, maybe you need to prove your identity to the server beyond just a password. This is where things like mutual authentication come in, where both sides cryptographically verify each other.
And things like VPNs help.
Definitely. especially against evil twin attacks. A good VPN encrypts all your traffic from your device to the VPN server. So even if you connect to a malicious hotspot, the attacker just sees encrypted gibberish flowing back and forth. They can't read your data.
And finally, it still comes down to the user being careful.
Always. User education is key. Always check for the HTTPS padlock. Understand the risks of public Wi-Fi. Maybe avoid logging into sensitive accounts there unless you're using a VPN. Use strong, unique passwords and absolutely enable multi-factor authentication, MFA, wherever possible. MFA makes stolen passwords much less useful to an attacker.
Okay, we've journeyed from the Morris worm's technical exploit through RCE mechanics to MITM interception tactics. Now let's bring it all together with a case study that embodies so many of these failures. The massive Equifax data breach in 2017.
Yeah, Equifax is. It's a landmark case, but for all the wrong reasons. It wasn't really about discovering some brand new, super sophisticated attack. It was about a catastrophic failure of basic execution.
And the target, Equifax itself, is unique, isn't it?
Absolutely. They're a consumer reporting agency, a CRA. They amass vast quantities of incredibly sensitive personal data, social security numbers, names, addresses, birth dates, driver's license info.
Of hundreds of millions of people.
Right. The breach affected around 148 million individuals. And here's the kicker. You and I, we don't choose to do business with Equifax. They collect our data from lenders, banks, retailers, whether we like it or not. We can't just opt out.
And that data they held, was it even encrypted properly?
That was one of the shocking findings. Huge amounts of this highly sensitive PII was apparently stored unencrypted on their systems, unencrypted at rest.
Unbelievable. Okay, so how did the attackers get in? What was the initial point of entry? Does it connect back to part 2?
Directly. It was RCE. Specifically, they exploited a known critical vulnerability in the Apache Struts web framework.
Apache Struts, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's a popular framework for building Java web applications. This particular vulnerability was CVE 2017-5638. It was rated critical, 10.0 severity. A patch was available.
When was the vulnerability disclosed and the patch released?
Public disclosure and patch were on March 7th, 2017.
Okay. Did Equifax know about it?
Oh, yes. U.S. CERT notified them on March 8th, and Equifax's own internal security team, the GTVM, sent out an alert on March 9th.
An internal alert. To whom?
To over 400 people within Equifax IT and security, and the alert was explicit. This is critical. Patch it within 48 hours.
So the policy was there, the awareness was there, patch within 48 hours.
The policy existed on paper, yeah.
But the patch wasn't applied, at least not everywhere.
It wasn't applied to the system that mattered most in this case. A legacy internet-facing application called ACIS, the Automated Consumer Interview System.
ACIS, what was that?
It was their portal for handling consumer disputes online. Built way back, apparently running on old Sun servers, and it was running a vulnerable version of Apache Struts.
And it faced the public internet.
Directly. And it didn't get patched within 48 hours. It didn't get patched at all before the attackers found it.
So the attackers just scanned the internet, found this unhatched critical vulnerability on an Equifax server, and walked right in using RCE.
That's essentially what happened. The initial compromise occurred around May 13, 2017, over 2 months after the patch was available and mandated internally.
Did Equifax try to scan for this vulnerability after their own alert went out?
They did. They ran vulnerability scans. But the scans failed to find the vulnerable struts instance on the ACIS system.
How? How do you scan for a known critical vulnerability and miss it?
It came down to misconfiguration and lack of visibility. Apparently, the scans were set up to check the root directory of the server, but the vulnerable struts application lived in a specific subdirectory. The scanner just didn't look there.
Wow. So bad scanning practices combined with a complex, probably poorly documented legacy system.
Exactly. It meant they thought they were clean when actually this massive vulnerability was sitting there exposed.
Okay, so the attackers get in via RCE around mid-May, but the breach wasn't discovered until the end of July. They were inside for 76 days undetected.
76 days. Wow.
How is that possible? Didn't they have intrusion detection systems, network monitoring?
They did. But there was another, almost unbelievable failure. The device responsible for inspecting the encrypted network traffic coming out of that ACIS system.
Yeah.
It wasn't working properly.
What device was that?
An SSL visibility appliance. Its job was to decrypt SSL TLS traffic so that the security tools, the intrusion detection systems, the data loss prevention systems could actually see what was inside the encrypted flows.
Okay, makes sense. You need to decrypt to inspect, so what went wrong with it?
Its SSL certificate had expired.
The certificate for the inspection device itself?
Yes, And it hadn't just expired recently. It had been expired for 19 months.
19 months? You're kidding.
Nope. Since January 2016. For 19 months, that device could not decrypt and inspect the traffic from the ACIS portal.
So for a year and a half, they were essentially blind to any malicious activity happening over encrypted channels on that critical system.
Completely blind. The appliance apparently had a setting where, if it couldn't decrypt because of the expired cert, it would just let the encrypted traffic pass through uninspected rather than block it and cause an outage.
They prioritized uptime over visibility.
It seems that way. So when the attackers started exfiltrating the stolen data, which they did over encrypted HTTPS connections, none of Equifax's security tools saw it happen because the traffic was never decrypted for inspection.
That is astounding. So what did the attackers do during those 76 days of free reign?
Well, first they made sure they could stay. They deployed about 30 different web shells.
Backdoors.
Exactly, giving them persistent access. Then they started exploring. And because Equifax apparently had very poor network segmentation.
Meaning once you were inside one system, you could easily move to others.
Pretty much. They could move laterally from that initial compromised web server to databases and other systems all across Equifax's global network.
And they found the mother lode, the PII databases.
They found them. And since the data was largely unencrypted at rest, grabbing it was easy, they ran about 9,000 queries against dozens of databases.
9,000 queries.
Pulled out all that sensitive PII for 148 million people. Then they compressed it into smaller files.
And downloaded it.
Using a standard basic Linux tool called reget. Nothing fancy. Just downloading the compressed data files over HTTPS.
And nobody noticed
Until July 29th. Someone finally renewed that expired SSL certificate on the inspection appliance. The moment they did, the security systems lit up like a Christmas tree, flagging huge amounts of suspicious outbound traffic heading to China. That's when they realized something was terribly wrong.
So the discovery was almost accidental, triggered by fixing a completely separate, long-standing basic error.
Pretty much.
Now, the investigation afterwards revealed this wasn't just about one unpatched server and one expired certificate, right? There were deeper systemic problems.
Oh, absolutely. An internal audit back in 2015 had already flagged many of the core issues that enabled the 2017 breach. Management knew about these risks.
What were the big systemic issues that kept coming up?
The sources highlight about 6 major ones that were still problems in 2017.
Okay.
1. Lack of network segmentation. We talked about that. It let the attackers roam freely. 2. No file integrity monitoring, or FIEM.
What would M have done?
It's software that watches for unexpected changes to critical system files. It should have immediately flagged those 30 web shells being dropped onto the ACIS server. Basic defense wasn't there.
Wow. Okay, 3.
3. A deficient IT asset inventory. This is huge. The senior vice president responsible, Grant Payne, testified he wasn't even aware that Apache Struts was running on the ACIS system.
If you don't know what software you have, you can't patch it.
Exactly. You can't secure what you don't know you have. Basic inventory management failure. 4. Poor log retention. Logs for ACIS were only kept for 7 days, made investigating the breach much harder.
Only 7 days. Okay, 5.
5. The inconsistent patching process itself. The 2015 audit called it an ineffective honor system with no real accountability. That clearly hadn't been fixed. And 6. Things like shared file systems, which made it easier for attackers to find credentials or configuration files to move laterally.
It paints a picture of just neglect of basic IT hygiene across the board.
Systemic neglect, yeah, despite apparently adequate security spending.
Equifax initially tried to pin the blame on human error, didn't they? Mentioning an employee who failed to forward that GTVM email back in March.
They did try to narrow it down to that, but testimony, including Payne's, called that a gross simplification. It ignored all the other systemic failures.
Like the patching policy itself being flawed.
Right. The policy said system owners had to patch, but Equifax hadn't actually designated official owners for many applications, including ACIS, so there was no one clearly accountable for ensuring the patch was applied there. The policy existed, but the process to enforce it was broken.
And the organizational structure itself played a role? The reporting lines?
That seems to be a key factor, too. For a long time, the Chief Security Officer, the CSO, didn't report to the Chief Information Officer, the CIO, who runs IT operations. The CSO reported to the Chief Legal Officer.
Security reporting to legal, not IT. That seems odd.
It created silos. Security policy was separate from IT execution, communication was likely slower, accountability blurred. The CIO David Webb even testified they discussed fixing this, moving the CSO under the CIO, and finally agreed to it just weeks before the breach discovery and his own retirement.
So leadership knew the structure was potentially problematic but didn't fix it in time.
It points to a leadership failure to address known structural weaknesses. Webb's conclusion was telling. They spent enough money on security tools. It wasn't a budget problem. It was, in his words, a failure of people and process, a failure of execution. Hashtag outro.
So when we put it all together, this journey we've taken today, it's pretty stark, isn't it? Back in 1988, the Morris worm taught everyone that, just trusting each other isn't enough. You have to actively defend against known technical flaws like buffer overflows.
Right, that was lesson 1. Technical vulnerabilities are real.
Then fast forward almost 30 years to Equifax. And the lesson there seems almost depressingly similar, but different too. It's that even when you have the tools, the budget, the policies written down,
if you fail at the basics of execution, actually patching the known flaw, knowing what systems you even have, renewing a critical security certificate that's been expired for 19 months, then all the advanced tools in the world don't matter. The door is still wide open.
Lesson 2, execution is everything.
Exactly. And the challenge is that the underlying vulnerabilities, the RCEs, the buffer overflows, the MITM techniques, they often do exploit failures in basic security hygiene. The hard part for big organizations is maintaining that constant diligence, that hygiene, across huge, complex, often ancient IT systems.
It's not just about buying the shiniest new security box.
No. It's about the relentless, day in, day out, often unglamorous work of patching, inventory configuration management, certificate renewals, the fundamentals.
So wrapping this up, what's the final thought for you, the listener, who's followed this history of digital risk?
Well, it raises a really uncomfortable question, I think, especially considering Equifax. Your most sensitive data, your identity information, is held by these huge organizations like CRAs that you fundamentally cannot avoid dealing with. You can't just opt out.
Right. You're stuck with them managing your data.
And when these critical organizations, the ones holding the keys to your identity, demonstrate such profound systemic struggles with basic IT management, inventory, patching, certificate management, internal accountability, how can you, as an individual, effectively manage your own cyber risk?
It feels like a loss of control.
To a degree. But maybe the first step, the first defense you do have, is understanding how these breaches happen. Knowing that it's also not black magic, but failures in basic, understandable processes. Recognizing that these are often organizational failures, not just purely technical ones. That knowledge itself is power, even when the stewards of your data are struggling.